This is the video for you to know all about chess. You will learn in this video about chessboard layout, initial setup of pieces, movement, block and capture of pieces, special moves like en passant, castling, pawn promotion, endgaming like check, checkmate, different types of draw like stalemate, threefold repetition, insufficient material, etc. And lastly, algebraic notation. So stay tuned to the end to know all about chess and don't forget to subscribe my YouTube channel by clicking the red button. So let's get started.
Board layout. A chessboard consists of 64 equal squares arranged in 8 rows and 8 columns. The squares are arranged in two alternating colors, white and black. The board is always set up so that each player has the right square on a right hand side. Remember, light on the right. Parts of the board. Rank. The 8 horizontal rows of the chessboards are called ranks. File. The 8 vertical columns of the chessboard are called files. Diagonal. A straight line of squares of the same color running at an angle from one edge of the board to another edge is called a diagonal. Center. The 4 squares found in the middle of the board are called the center. Initial setup. The chessboard is rotated so that there is a white square in the first row at the player's right side. The pieces are placed on the white and black side of the board in the same manner. In the first row beginning at both outer edges and moving inward, place the rook, then the knight, sometimes called the horse, and then the bishop. For the remaining 2 squares, place the queen on the square with the same color. The queen always stands on the square of her own color. Thus, the light colored queen must stand on the light colored square. A good way of remembering this is the saying, "The queen is a fashionable lady. She likes her dress to match her shoes." Place the king on the final square. Pawns on the 2nd and 7th row. The finished board then looks like the diagram. Points. They have different points to indicate how valuable they are. A queen is worth 9 points, so she is far more valuable than a pawn, which is only worth 1 point. Bishop and knight are 3 points each. The king can never be captured, and so he is invaluable. If he is captured, then the game is lost. The person with the white pieces always begin the game. Movement of rook. The rook moves horizontally and vertically any number of squares, forward or backwards, resembling a plus pattern. In the diagram, the rook can move to any number of the highlighted red squares. Block. Rook cannot capture its own color. In this diagram, the rook now has less choice of squares to which it can move because the other white pieces blocks its path. It can now only move to a highlighted red square. Capture. If any enemy piece is standing on a square to which the rook can move, it can be captured. In the diagram, white is able to capture the bishop with a rook. She does this by removing the bishop from the board and placing the rook on that square instead. The rook captures the bishop and claims the square for itself. Movement of bishop. The bishop moves diagonally any number of squares, forwards or backwards, resembling X pattern. The diagram shows all the possible squares to which the bishop can move. Each side has 2 bishops. One bishop moves along the light color squares and the other bishop moves along the dark color square. Block. The bishop's path can be blocked by other pieces on the chessboard. In the diagram, the bishop can now has less choice of squares to which it can move because the other white pieces blocks its path. Capture. In the diagram, the white bishop is able to capture the rook. She does this by removing the rook from the board and placing her bishop in its place. Movement of queen. The queen is the most powerful piece on the board. This is because it can control more squares. It moves straight forward or backward and diagonally any number of squares. In the diagram, the queen can move to any of the highlighted red squares. Block. However, like all other pieces mentioned so far, the queen's path can be blocked by other pieces. In the diagram, the queen now has less choice of squares to which it can move because the other pieces blocks its path. Capture. In the diagram, the queen may either take the bishop or the rook. The queen chooses to capture the rook. Movement of queen. The king is the most important piece on the chessboard. It can never be captured, and if it is in danger, then it must be made safe immediately. If it is not possible to make the king safe, then the game is lost. The king may move 1 square in any direction. In the diagram, the king is able to move to one of the highlighted red square. Block. However, like all other pieces mentioned so far, the king's path can be blocked by other pieces. However, the king must never move onto a square that has been attacked by an opponent's pieces. In the diagram, the king cannot move to the square marked green because the black bishop is attacking those squares. Capture. If a piece is on a square that the king can move to, then the king may capture that piece. In the diagram, the king may capture the rook. This position is almost the same as earlier. However, there is very one important difference. The bishop is now protecting the rook, so that if the king captures the rook, the king would be attacked by the bishop. We say that the king would be in check and black would be able to capture the king on the next move. The king can never move himself into danger like this, so he is unable to capture the rook. Movement of knight. The knight moves in an L shape in any direction. We can say that in either moves 2 squares sideways and then 1 square up or down, or 2 squares up or down and then 1 square sideways. The knight changes the color of the square it stands on which other move. Therefore, if it starts off with a light color square, when it finishes it will be moved on a land on a dark color square. In the diagram, the knight can move to any of the red color squares. No block for knight. Just like a real horse, the knight may jump over pieces. Therefore, the white knight can move to any of the highlighted red squares in the diagram. Capture. The knight is able to jump over the pawn in its way and capture the black pawn. The knight captures the pawn. Movement of pawn. Except on its first move, a pawn may only move 1 square forward at a time. Pawns can never move backwards. When a pawn makes its very first move, it has its choice. It can either move 1 square or 2. However, it moves 1 square in all the following moves. Block. If a square immediately in front of the pawn contains another piece, then the pawn is unable to move forward. It is blocked. None of the pawn in this diagram can move. Capture. Although a pawn moves straight forward, it captures by taking 1 square diagonally forward. In the diagram, white can capture either the rook or the knight. She does this by removing the captured piece from the board and replacing it with the pawn. The diagram shows the position after the pawn has captured the rook. Special move, the en passant. Every pawn on its first move has the choice of moving either 1 or 2 squares forward. Look at this diagram. Black may think, if I move my pawn 1 square, white will capture it. So I will move it 2 squares, and the position would be as shown in the diagram. However, white can still take the black pawn as if he had moved only 1 square. White removes the black pawn from the board and places the white pawn on the square the black pawn would have moved it if it had only moved 1 square forward. This special way of capturing is called capturing en passant. Remember, the en passant capture must be done immediately after the black pawn advances 2 squares. If white plays another move, she cannot then decide to capture the en passant. Castling. Castling uses the king and 1 rook, and it is the only time in the game when more than 1 piece may be moved during the single turn. In castling, a king is moved 2 squares towards the rook, and the rook is then moved to a square on the other side of the king. In the diagram, the white king has castled king side or castled short. It has moved 2 squares to the right, and the rook had come to stand on the square immediately next to the king on its opposite side. In this diagram, the white king has castled queen side or castled long. Again, it has moved 2 squares, but this time it has moved to the left and the rook has come to the stand on a square immediately next to the king on the opposite side. Castling has some rigid requirements. Both the king and the rook may never have moved during the game. There is no pieces between the king and the rook. The king is not in check as seen in the diagram. The king does not cross over a square that is attacked by the opponent pieces as seen in the diagram. The king does not end the move on a square that is attacked by the opponent pieces. Pawn promotion. When a pawn reaches the other end of the board, it can be changed to any other piece of its own color except the king. This is called promotion. Therefore, a pawn can be promoted to a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight. Normally, a pawn is promoted to a queen, but sometimes there may be good reason to promote a pawn to another piece instead. Checkmate. When the king is under attack and threatened with capture by an opponent piece, the king is said to be in check. A king must get out of check immediately. There are 3 possibilities to get out of a check. In this position, the capturing the attacking piece, the bishop captures the rook. Move the king away from the attack to a safe square which is not under attack by the opponent's piece, the red highlighted part. Block the attack by placing a piece between the attacker and the king, placing the bishop between the king and the rook. If the king has no way to escape from the check, the position is called checkmate and the game ends. The player who is checkmated loses the game. The king is never actually captured and removed from the board. Resign. At any point during the game, a player may resign. The game ends and the player's opponents win the game. Draw. A draw is a tie between the players. There are several ways that a draw can occur. Stalemate. If a player has no legal move, every possible move would put the king in check, but the kings are not presently in check. The game ends in a stalemate. Stalemate results in a game being a draw. As seen in this position, black king has no legal move. Second is threefold repetition. If the exact same position is repeated at least 3 times, it requires that the possible moves of all the pieces of both the players are the same. 50 move rule. If no pieces had been captured or a pawn moved in the last 50 moves by each player. Insufficient material. King versus king. King and bishop versus king. King and knight versus king. So a draw can be either by a stalemate, a threefold repetition, 50 move rule, or insufficient material, or by mutual agreement between the players. Each individual square has a name, so records of the moves of the game can be kept. Several naming systems exist, but algebraic notation is the most popular and is the official system. In this system, each square is named for the row and column in which it is found. The ranks are numbered from 1 to 8, beginning from white side of the board and moving to black side of the board. The files are labeled by lowercase letters from A to H, moving from left to right based on the white player's viewpoint. The square is named by the letter followed by a number. Thus, the lower left-hand square is known as A1. The naming of the square can be seen in the diagram. There are some symbols you should know while reading or writing chess notations. K for king, Q for queen, R for rook, B for bishop, N for knight, cross for capture, plus for check, hashtag for checkmate, 2 circles for castling king side and 3 circles for castles queen side. As you can see from the algebraic notation, the first white move. F4 means on the first move, the pawn on the F2 square moved to the F4 square. The fifth white move, NF3 means that the knight on the G1 square moved to the F3 square. Black's fifth move, QG3 plus means the black queens on G5 captured a piece on G3, and the plus means with this move the opponent king was checked. Black's sixth move, BG3 hashtag means the black bishop on D6 moved to G3 and checkmated the white king. If you have liked this video, please give a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe my YouTube channel by clicking the red button, and please share this video.